humid air of the Ia Drang Valley, thick enough to taste, suddenly exploded in a storm of green tracers. For the young men of the 1st Cavalry Division, this was the moment of truth. They dropped into the mud, clutching their revolutionary new M16 rifles, sleek, black, and futuristic. A soldier squeezed his trigger, expecting the sharp crackle of automatic fire. Instead, he got a sickening click. He pulled the charging handle, the hot casing, refusing to budge. All around him, the same nightmare was unfolding. The symphony of American firepower was being replaced by the desperate, frantic sounds of soldiers trying to unjam their weapons while the enemy closed in. This wasn't supposed to happen. The M16 was heralded as a marvel of modern engineering, a space-age weapon delivered from the laboratories of the Pentagon to dominate the battlefields of Southeast Asia. It was lightweight, accurate, and capable of spitting fire at a dizzying rate. It promised to be the GI's best friend, a decisive technological edge over the rugged AK-47. But in the unforgiving crucible of combat, that promise was rotting into a deadly lie. Instead of an angel of death, the American soldier had been handed a fragile, unreliable tool that chose the worst possible moment to fail. The crisis was more than just a mechanical failure. It was a profound betrayal. It was a crisis of faith, seeding deep mistrust between the men on the front lines and the bureaucracy that had armed them. Every jam, every malfunction, every soldier cut down while desperately trying to clear his rifle sent a shockwave of rage and despair from the jungle clearings back to the halls of power in Washington, D.C. This is the story of that betrayal. It is the story of how a revolutionary weapon became a soldier's worst nightmare, and the brutal, hard-won battle fought not just in the mud of Vietnam, but in congressional hearings and ordnance testing grounds to reclaim its soul and forge it into the legendary rifle it was always meant to be. The promise had been so seductive, a siren song of technological supremacy whispered from the Pentagon's highest echelons. It was a promise forged in contrast to the weapon it was meant to replace, the M14. The M14 was a product of an older world, a direct descendant of the M1 Garand that had won World War II. It was a brute of a rifle crafted from heavy steel and solid wood, firing a powerful 7.62 millimeters round that could punch through engine blocks. It was reliable, powerful, and respected, but it was a sledgehammer in a war that increasingly required a surgeon's scalpel. Its shoulder-bruising recoil made fully automatic fire an uncontrollable fantasy, and its sheer weight, along with its heavy ammunition, burdened the foot soldier in the sweltering jungle, limiting his combat load and draining his stamina. Into this reality, the M16 arrived like a visitor from another planet. Picking it up for the first time was a revelation. Made of lightweight aluminum alloy and futuristic black polymer, it felt more like a precision instrument than a weapon of war. This lightness was liberating. A soldier could carry twice as much ammunition for the M16 as he could for the M14, a critical advantage in the prolonged firefights that defined the Vietnam conflict. The heart of its revolutionary design was the new 5.56 millimeters cartridge. It was a small, high-velocity round, a tiny supersonic hornet that screamed out of the barrel at over 3,000 feet per second. Its genius designers claimed was not in punching through cover, but in what it did to human flesh. Upon impact, the unstable projectile would tumble end over end, creating a devastating wound channel that far exceeded its small caliber. Furthermore, the rifle's innovative direct impingement gas system and inline stock design drastically reduced recoil, turning the once unmanageable beast of full-auto fire into a controllable stream of lethal projectiles. The M16 was not just a rifle, it was a system, a new philosophy of infantry combat. It was the promise of a lighter, faster, deadlier American soldier, perfectly equipped to outmaneuver and outfight his enemy in the dense, unforgiving wilderness. But the jungle doesn't care about promises made in air-conditioned boardrooms. The brutal reality that followed the M16 into combat was a catastrophic betrayal of that promise. The single desperate click of a jammed rifle first heard in the Ia Drang Valley became a terrifying, echoing chorus across all of South Vietnam. From the Mekong Delta to the DMZ, the reports began to trickle, then flood, and all telling the same horrifying story. The primary and most unforgivable sin of the new rifle was a catastrophic malfunction known as failure to extract. under the intense heat and pressure of firing, the spent brass casing would become welded inside the chamber. The extractor claw would rip a chunk out of the casing's rim, leaving the rest hopelessly stuck. The rifle was now inert, a useless club. To fix it, a soldier had to force a cleaning rod down the barrel, a multi-step fine motor skill process that was a death sentence in the middle of an ambush. The reports from the field painted a grim mosaic of this failure. Squads were being overrun, their positions silenced, not by enemy bullets, but by their own malfunctioning weapons. A chilling recurring image began to emerge from after-action reports. American soldiers found dead in their foxholes, their M16s broken open beside them, a cleaning rod still clutched in their hands. They had died not while fighting, but while trying to fix the very tool meant to keep them alive. The trust between man and weapon, the most sacred bond in combat, was being systematically destroyed. Soldiers and letters home, dripping with fury and fear, gave the rifle bitter nicknames: the Mattel toy for its plastic feel, the Jam-O-Matic, or most damningly, the weapon you have to clean in the middle of a firefight. This wasn't an isolated issue or a bad batch. It was an epidemic. The same rifle that performed flawlessly in sterile testing environments was dying a slow, agonizing death in the grit, humidity, and fine-grained mud of Vietnam. The promise of a lightweight, futuristic superweapon had dissolved into the grim reality of a high-maintenance, fragile liability. The technological marvel designed to be a lifesaver had become an instrument of death for its own users. The tidal wave of damning reports and the growing pile of body bags demanded an answer to the single agonizing question that echoed from the rice paddies to the White House. Why? Why was this revolutionary rifle failing so catastrophically? The answer, when it was finally unearthed, was not a single simple flaw, but a horrifying confluence of cynical decision-making, engineering oversight, and breathtaking arrogance. It was an autopsy of a disaster, and it revealed three primary culprits, an unholy trinity of failure that had conspired to turn the M16 into a killer of its own men. The original sin, the fatal decision from which all other problems flowed, was a change in the weapon's lifeblood, its ammunition. Eugene Stoner, the rifle's visionary creator, had designed his weapon around a specific cartridge loaded with IMR stick powder. This powder was a clean-burning, stable propellant that functioned in perfect harmony with the M16's unique and delicate direct impingement gas system. It was the specified fuel for a high-performance engine. But in their infinite wisdom, the bureaucrats at Army Ordnance Command, driven by the logistics of mass production and the allure of cost-cutting, unilaterally ordered a switch. They substituted the clean IMR powder for standard-issue ball powder, a cheaper, denser propellant used in other military ammunition. On paper, the change seemed logical. In reality, it was a catastrophic act of sabotage. Ball powder burned significantly dirtier, leaving behind a thick, gritty carbon residue. This corrosive filth was blasted directly back into the rifle's action, with every shot gumming up the tight tolerances of the bolt carrier group and turning the chamber into a sticky trap. Furthermore, the pressure curve of ball powder was sharper, causing the rifle's cyclic rate to skyrocket far beyond its design specifications. This put immense violent stress on the delicate extractor and buffer system, creating a recipe for constant, brutal part failure. This fouling nightmare was horrifically compounded by the second culprit, a critical design oversight in the form of an untreated chamber. The M16, in its initial production run, was not manufactured with a chrome-lined chamber or barrel. In the sterile, controlled environment of an American testing range, this was a non-issue. But in the ravenous, soul-sucking humidity of Vietnam, it was a fatal flaw. The moisture in the air, combined with a corrosive residue from the dirty ball powder, began to cause microscopic pitting and corrosion on the chamber walls. This created a vicious cycle of failure. The carbon fouling from the powder would glue the soft brass casing of the spent cartridge to the chamber walls, and the microscopic corrosion would give that glue an even stronger grip. When the soldier fired, the overworked extractor claw would attempt to pull the case out, but the case wouldn't budge. The result was inevitable. The extractor would tear the rim clean off the casing, leaving the bloated, headless piece of brass hopelessly jammed in the chamber. The rifle was now completely out of action, and the soldier was left defenseless. a victim of a chemical reaction he couldn't see, and a design flaw he couldn't possibly have known about. The final piece of this deadly puzzle was a layer of institutional hubris so thick it defied belief. The M16 had been marketed to the top brass as a futuristic, low-maintenance weapon, leading to the deadly myth of the self-cleaning rifle. This arrogant assumption led to two unforgivable logistical failures. First, the Army failed to issue cleaning kits. Soldiers were sent into one of the filthiest, most corrosive environments on the planet with a weapon that was uniquely susceptible to fouling, yet they were given no tools to clean it. They were forced to improvise with whatever they could find: bootlaces, scraps of cloth, even coat hanger wire, in a desperate attempt to keep their weapons functional. Second, because the rifle was deemed low-maintenance, training in its proper care was almost non-existent. Soldiers who were accustomed to the simple, rugged M14 were given a complex new weapon system and almost no instruction on how to disassemble, clean, and lubricate it. The very weapon that demanded the most diligent, obsessive maintenance was the one soldiers were told needed the least. It was a perfect storm of failure, a cost-cutting change in ammunition that created filth, a design flaw that allowed that filth to become corrosive, and a callous dismissal of basic maintenance that left the soldier with no way to fight back against either. The crisis was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of a series of deliberate, disastrous decisions made far from the battlefield. But the cold hard facts of poor powder-untrained chambers and absent cleaning kits meant nothing without understanding their cost in human terms. A cost paid in blood, fear, and a fury so profound it threatened to boil over. On the front lines, the bond between a soldier and his rifle is sacred, an extension of his own will to survive. The M16 shattered that bond. Trust curdled into contempt. Soldiers who had initially been intrigued by the weapon's futuristic design now looked upon it with a venomous hatred. It was no longer a rifle. It was a curse, a worthless piece of black plastic that had betrayed them at the ultimate moment. This betrayal manifested in acts of sheer desperation. The ultimate insult, the most profound vote of no confidence, was when a soldier would risk everything to discard his M16 and pick up a fallen enemy's AK-47. The AK was everything the M16 was not: heavy, crude, and inaccurate at range, but it was brutally, idiotically reliable. It worked. In the mud, in the rain, covered in filth, it would fire when the trigger was pulled. The sight of American GIs preferring the enemy's weapon was a humiliation that no sanitized report could explain away. For those who couldn't find an AK, a frantic subculture of obsessive maintenance was born out of pure survival instinct. Soldiers became scavengers, hoarding precious pipe cleaners, dental brushes, and cans of unauthorized lubricant, creating their own makeshift cleaning kits. They cleaned their rifles relentlessly, treating them not like rugged tools of war, but like fragile, temperamental machines on the verge of collapse, because that is exactly what they were. The rage was palpable, poured into letters home, written on sweat-stained paper letters that were not just notes to loved ones, but desperate pleas for help and furious indictments of the system that had armed them with a broken promise. While this life and death struggle unfolded in the jungle, a different battle was being waged in the sterile, climate-controlled corridors of the Pentagon and Army ordnance, a battle of denial. The initial reports of catastrophic failures were met with a wall of bureaucratic inertia and condescending disbelief. High-ranking officers, insulated by thousands of miles and a mountain of paperwork, dismissed the soldiers' accounts as anecdotal, exaggerated, or worse, as evidence of the soldiers' own failings. The official narrative pushed down from on high was that the M16 was a perfect weapon being mishandled by undisciplined troops. It was the soldiers' fault. They weren't cleaning it properly. They didn't understand the sophisticated new system. This blame shifting was more than just an institutional defense mechanism. It was a deep, unforgivable insult to the men who were dying because of their decisions. To tell a man facing death that his weapon failed because of his own incompetence was a lie of criminal proportions. Reports detailing the specific nature of the jams were filed, buried, and ignored. The machine of war had decided on a course, and the cries of the men caught in its gears were merely an inconvenient noise. But the truth, raw and ugly, has a way of clawing its way into the light. The catalyst for change was not a single event, but a powerful convergence of pressure that the bureaucracy could no longer ignore. The flood of angry, heartbroken letters from soldiers began to reach their parents, their local newspapers, and crucially, their congressmen. A story of a son killed while trying to unjam his rifle is a political firebomb. Journalists in the field, tired of the official sanitized press briefings, began talking to the grunts and hearing the same story of betrayal over and over. Then a crusading congressman from Missouri, Richard Icord, began to collect these accounts. Fueled by a growing pile of letters from his own constituents, he launched a congressional investigation. The Icord subcommittee hearings became the public showdown that the Pentagon had desperately tried to avoid. For the first time, the official narrative was shattered under oath. The hushed-up reports were subpoenaed. Expert testimony confirmed the devastating effects of the ammunition switch and the unchromed chamber. The carefully constructed wall of denial crumbled, and the full horrifying scope of the M16 crisis was finally exposed to a shocked and outraged nation. The battle to fix the rifle could now begin. The fallout from the Icord hearings was an earthquake that shattered the foundations of the Army's ordnance bureaucracy. The lies were exposed, the excuses evaporated under the harsh glare of public scrutiny, and the stage was set for a frantic top-down crusade to fix a weapon that was killing its own. There was no more time for denial, no more room for error. A debt of blood had been incurred, and the only way to repay it was with immediate, decisive, and comprehensive action. The process was not merely an engineering update. It was a campaign of redemption, a desperate race to restore the faith that had been so catastrophically broken. The first demon to be exorcised was the ammunition, the original sin that had poisoned the entire system. The order came down like a thunderclap. The specifications for the 5.56mm cartridge were to be immediately and drastically overhauled. The dirty, fast-burning ball powder that had choked the life out of the rifle was reformulated, its chemical composition altered to reduce the thick carbon fouling. More importantly, the propellant specifications were changed to bring the rifle's cyclic rate back down from its frantic destructive pace to within Stoner's original design parameters. This single change was a monumental undertaking requiring a massive industrial pivot from ammunition manufacturers across the country. It was a tacit but powerful admission that the cost-cutting measures had been a deadly mistake. The engine of the M16 was finally going to get the clean fuel it had always needed. Simultaneously, engineers tackled the second critical flaw, the raw, unchromed chamber. The solution was as elegant as it was essential. A micro-thin layer of hard chrome applied to the interior of the chamber and barrel. This was not a minor tweak. Chroming the bore was a complex, expensive process, but its benefits were transformative. The slick, non-porous surface of the chrome was like armor against the ravages of the jungle. It dramatically reduced friction, making the extraction of spent casings smoother and far more reliable. It was also incredibly resistant to corrosion, preventing the microscopic pitting that had been the anchor for the stubborn, stuck cases. Implementing this change meant retooling production lines and retrofitting thousands of existing barrels, a logistical feat of immense proportions. But it was non-negotiable. Every new rifle barrel that came off the line would now be a gleaming silver-lined testament to a lesson learned in blood. Yet providing a mechanically sound weapon was only half the battle. The institutional arrogance that had spawned the myth of the self-cleaning rifle had to be systematically dismantled and replaced with a new doctrine of almost religious devotion to maintenance. The solution came in a two-pronged assault of logistics and education. First, a massive emergency airlift was initiated. Millions of newly designed cleaning kits, complete with a multi-sectioned rod, bore brushes, a chamber brush, and small bottles of lubricant, were packed and flown directly to Vietnam. The sight of pallets of these simple kits arriving in-country was for the common soldier a more tangible sign of change than any press release from Washington. It was a physical admission of the Army's previous failure and a promise of support. Second, a sweeping new training program was created from scratch. Simple comic book-style manuals featuring the now iconic character of Will Eisner were distributed to every soldier, illustrating the proper steps for disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly. Drill sergeants, once dismissive of the rifle's maintenance needs, now turned cleaning into a relentless, high-stakes ritual. The soldier was taught the intimate anatomy of his weapon, forced to understand every pin, spring, and surface. This intensive education culminated in the birth of the definitive M16A1. This new model incorporated all the critical fixes, the reformulated ammunition, the chrome chamber, and one final brilliant addition, the forward assist. It was a simple plunger-like button on the side of the receiver that allowed a soldier to manually force the bolt carrier forward, ensuring a round was fully seated in the chamber. More than just a mechanical aid, the forward assist was a psychological masterstroke. It gave the soldier a final, tangible measure of control, a way to physically confirm his weapon was ready. It was a prayer, answered a silent reassurance in the face of chaos. The M16A1 was not just a rifle, it was an apology, an atonement in steel and polymer now being rushed to the front lines to finally deliver on its broken promise. The arrival of the M16A1 on the front lines was not met with celebration but with a deep, weary skepticism. The grunts had been burned before. They looked at the new rifles with narrowed, suspicious eyes, examining the gleaming chrome in the chamber and the strange new plunger on the receiver. But this time, something was different. The shipments came not just with rifles, but with the tools of their salvation cleaning kits, in oiled canvas pouches, and comic books that spoke their language, teaching them the gospel of maintenance. The change wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow, hard-won battle for trust fought one firefight at a time. A soldier would go into a skirmish expecting the familiar dreaded click, but instead, the rifle would answer with a full, uninterrupted roar. A squad leader pinned down would call for suppressive fire and be met not with a cacophony of jammed actions, but with a disciplined, sustained wall of lead that forced the enemy's heads down. Slowly, cautiously, the tide began to turn. The bitter nicknames started to fade from the lexicon of the jungle. The Mattel toy proved it could withstand the brutal realities of combat. The Jam-O-Matic stopped jamming. In its place, a grudging respect grew, which then blossomed into a fierce protective confidence. Soldiers who once cursed the rifle now praised its lightness and lethal accuracy. They learned to trust the satisfying thump of the forward assist as they chambered a round, a final confirmation that their weapon was ready for the hell to come. The M16A1 was finally delivering on its original promise. The full potential of its design was unleashed, and it began to fundamentally change the nature of infantry combat. The concept of fire superiority, once a lofty ideal, became a tactical reality. American squads, armed with reliable, controllable automatic weapons and carrying vast amounts of lightweight ammunition, could now generate a volume of fire that was simply overwhelming. A storm of supersonic hornets that shredded the jungle and suppressed enemy positions with terrifying efficiency. The weapon, once a liability, had become a decisive advantage. But the legacy of the M16 crisis extends far beyond the battlefields of Vietnam. It was a crucible that forged a new relationship between the soldier and the military-industrial complex. The catastrophic initial failure and the subsequent public outcry served as a brutal, humbling lesson for the Pentagon's leadership. It proved in the starkest terms possible that laboratory tests and theoretical performance mean nothing if a weapon fails in the hands of the men who must use it to stay alive. The arrogant dismissal of soldiers' complaints was exposed as not just a moral failing but a strategic blunder of the highest order. The ghosts of the soldiers who died with cleaning rods in their hands haunted the Ordnance Corps for a generation, ensuring that the voice of the end user, the grunt in the mud, would never again be so callously ignored. A new design philosophy was born, one that prioritized reliability and user feedback above all else. This painful lesson became the rifle's most enduring legacy. The M16 platform, which began its life in disgrace, not only survived but evolved. It became the foundation for the M16, the M4 carbine, and a host of other variants that would arm the American military for the next half-century and beyond, making it the longest-serving rifle in U.S. history. Its iconic silhouette is now burned into the collective consciousness, an inseparable symbol of the American soldier from the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan. Its story is the ultimate paradox. A weapon that began as a national shame, a symbol of bureaucratic arrogance and technological failure, was redeemed through a trial by fire. It stands today as a powerful, enduring testament to the ability to learn from the most catastrophic of mistakes, and a solemn reminder that the first and most important feature of any soldier's weapon is the simple, sacred promise that, when the trigger is pulled, it will fire. The story of the M16 is a closed chapter in the history books, but its lessons are a living, breathing testament that we ignore at our peril. We have journeyed through the entire arc of its violent birth, from the seductive promise of a space-age marvel to the gut-wrenching reality of its failure in the mud of Vietnam. We have performed the autopsy on its mechanical soul, identifying the unholy trinity of flaws, the dirty powder, the raw steel, the absent tools that turned it into a weapon of self-destruction. We have witnessed the clash of worlds, the desperate unheard screams from the front lines crashing against the granite walls of bureaucratic denial. We have followed the frantic redemptive scramble to fix the unforgivable, culminating in the birth of the M16, A1, a rifle reborn from the ashes of its own catastrophic failure. Now, standing at the end of this saga, we are left with more than just a historical account. We are left with a legacy, a warning, and a profound and urgent call to action. Let this be our first and most critical mission, to wage a relentless war against the kind of institutional arrogance that allowed this tragedy to unfold. The M16 crisis was not at its core a failure of engineering, but a failure of listening. It was the product of a culture that believed the polished theories of the boardroom were superior to the bloody realities of the battlefield. It was a culture that saw the soldier not as the ultimate expert on his own survival, but as an inconvenient variable, a problem to be managed, rather than a partner to be heard. We must reject this mindset in every aspect of our modern lives. Whether in corporate offices, government halls, or technological labs, we must challenge the assumption that those in power inherently know best. We are called to amplify the voices from the front lines of our own worlds: the teacher in the classroom, the nurse on the hospital floor, the engineer on the factory line. We must build systems that reward rather than punish the bearers of inconvenient truths. The memory of the M16 demands that we tear down our ivory towers and listen to the wisdom of experience. From this, our second call to action emerges. We must champion a culture of radical accountability. The initial response to the M16's failures to blame the user was an act of profound moral cowardice. It was a system protecting itself at the expense of its most vulnerable members. Today we are surrounded by complex systems that are equally capable of deflecting responsibility. When a piece of software fails, when a public policy backfires, when a corporate strategy collapses, the first instinct is too often to blame user error or unforeseen circumstances. The legacy of the soldiers who died while trying to unjam their rifles compels us to do better. We must demand clear lines of responsibility. We must ask the hard questions and refuse to accept sanitized, evasive answers. We have a sacred duty to ensure that the human cost of a decision is always placed squarely on the shoulders of those who made it. This is not about vengeance. It is about creating a future where the fear of genuine accountability drives leaders to make better, more humane choices. Finally, we are called to be vigilant skeptics of technological salvation. We live in an age that worships innovation, an era of seductive promises about the next revolutionary app, the next disruptive platform, the next AI that will solve all our problems. The M16 was the disruptive technology of its day, and its story serves as a chilling reminder that innovation without validation is a recipe for disaster. Let us carry forward the lessons learned in the jungles of Vietnam by refusing to be blinded by the sheen of the new. We must demand rigor. We must ask not just what a technology can do in a perfect lab, but how it will perform in the messy, unpredictable reality of our world. We must value the hard-won lessons of history over the fleeting allure of marketing. The story of the M16 implores us to honor the complex, often painful relationship between humanity and its tools, and to remember that every new invention carries with it not just a promise, but a profound responsibility. The saga of this rifle is therefore not a relic of the past. It is a living parable whose lessons are more critical now than ever. To remember, this story is not a passive act. It is an active commitment. It is a commitment to listen, to question, and to hold power accountable. The names of the men who fell not just to the enemy but to the failures of their own equipment are etched into the soul of this legacy. We honor their memory not with silence but with action. We honor them by ensuring that their story becomes a permanent part of our institutional conscience, a guiding principle that forces us to be better, wiser, and more humble in the face of the systems we create. Let that be our mission.